You wake up in a country that looks rich on paper. Shiny airports, new highways, glass towers reflecting the sun, and yet somehow you can't afford to live there anymore. Not because you're reckless, not because you're lazy, but because the math quietly stopped working. That's the uncomfortable truth behind the growing list of countries where living is becoming impossible. Not difficult, not stressful, impossible. And the scariest part is this isn't happening in failed states or war zones. It's happening in places the world still calls successful. This topic matters right now because, for the first time in decades, entire populations are discovering that economic stability was never guaranteed. It was rented temporarily at a price that just reset. 4 years, we were told the same story. Work hard. Get educated. Move to opportunity. The system will reward you. But systems don't reward effort. They reward alignment. And in many countries today, the incentives have shifted so sharply that ordinary life is being priced out in real time. Let's talk about how this actually works. Every country runs on 3 invisible pillars: housing, wages, and the cost of basic survival. Food, energy, transport, healthcare. For life to feel livable, these 3 have to move together. Slowly, predictably. Or when one pillar accelerates, while the others freeze. Pressure builds quietly. Then suddenly, housing is usually the first to break. Take Canada. For years, it marketed itself as stable, safe, welcoming. And it is! But stability attracted capital, global money, investors, pension funds. Real estate became a financial product before it was a place to live. Prices rose faster than wages. Then rents followed. At first, people coped. Smaller apartments, longer commutes, more roommates. But then the math turned cruel. In cities like Toronto or Vancouver, median rent began consuming over 50% of take-home pay for average earners. That's not tight. That is unsustainable. At that point, 1 illness, 1 layoff, 1 interest rate hike collapses the entire structure. Now zoom out to Europe, Germany, the Netherlands, Ireland. Countries known for strong social systems, strong worker protections. And yet, young professionals are living with parents into their mid-30s. Not because they want to, but because the entry ticket to independence has exploded. Why? Because housing supply moves slowly, but demand, fueled by cheap credit and global investors, moves fast. When interest rates were near zero, borrowing felt painless. Governments encouraged it. Central banks supported it. Everyone thought it was manageable. Then inflation arrived. Rates rose. Mortgages reset. Rents jumped. Energy bills spiked. Food prices climbed. Wages didn't. That's the hidden mechanism. Inflation isn't evenly distributed. It attacks necessities first, the things you can't opt out of. Now let's go further. Japan is often described as cheap for foreigners. But for locals, it's a different story. Decades of wage stagnation created a population with predictable incomes. In a world where prices are no longer predictable, when energy imports rise, when food costs increase, when the yen weakens, there's no cushion, no wage growth to absorb the shock. People don't starve, but they shrink their lives. Fewer meals out, fewer children, fewer risks, fewer dreams. That's a form of collapse that never makes headlines. Now look at the United Kingdom. Publicly, it's framed as a temporary a few tough years. Some belt tightening, but underneath, the incentives are broken. Housing is treated as wealth storage, not shelter. Utilities are privatized. Transport is expensive. Taxes are high. And public services are strained. For a growing segment of the population, full-time work no longer guarantees stability. That's a psychological shock, one that changes behavior fast. People stop planning long-term. They delay families. They avoid starting businesses. They live, which brings us to a crucial point. When living becomes impossible, people don't rebuild first. They exit. Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, beautiful countries. Affordable by tourist standards. But for locals earning local wages, especially young people, life is a constant trade-off between survival and stagnation. In many of these places, housing costs are being set by global demand. Digital nomads, retirees, investors, while wages remain local. That gap is fatal. Now, let's address the uncomfortable math most governments avoid. If housing prices rise faster than wages for long enough, homeownership becomes mathematically impossible for the median citizen. Not difficult. Impossible. No amount of budgeting fixes that. No amount of financial literacy closes a structural gap. And once people realize that, trust erodes. Here's where the irony comes in. Many of these countries are praised globally, ranked high in quality of life indexes, happiness reports, safety metrics, but those rankings often assume you already own property, or you moved in with external income, or you locked in costs years ago. They measure the past, not the present. The reality is a two-tier society forming in real time. Those who entered the system early, with assets, cheap debt, and stability, and those arriving now, facing inflated prices, tighter credit, and fragile employment. This divide isn't ideological. It's a rift. Now consider places like South Korea. High education, advanced technology, global brands, and yet some of the longest working hours, highest youth unemployment pressure, and lowest birth rates on Earth. Why? Because the cost of starting life has outpaced the rewards of finishing school. Apartments require massive deposit. Competition is brutal. Expectations are relentless. The system technically works, but emotionally, it's draining people dry. Then there are countries where the situation is more extreme. Argentina, Turkey, Lebanon. Here, inflation doesn't creep. It sprints. Currencies weaken, savings evaporate, prices reset weekly. Wages, chess, from behind. In these places, people become financial tacticians just to survive, buying goods immediately, avoiding cash, thinking in months, not years. That's not living. That's constant defense. But here's the twist. Even in countries without hyperinflation, the same logic is quietly spreading. When the cost of survival grows faster than the value of labor, society enters a pressure state, and pressure doesn't release evenly. Some people move abroad. Some rely on family. Some take on debt. Some simply opt out of ambition. The long-term risk isn't collapse. It's stagnation. An economy where people can't afford to fail, but also can't afford to try. Governments often respond with surface solutions. Subsidies, temporary caps, one-time payments. These help symptoms. They don't change incentives, because the core issue is this. Modern economies increasingly reward ownership over participation, assets over labor, early entry over effort. And as long as that remains true, more countries will quietly slide into the unlivable category for ordinary people. Not because they're poor, but because they're misaligned. So, here's the unresolved question. If living in some of the world's most developed countries now requires either inherited assets, external income, or perfect timing, what does that say about the future of work, migration, and stability? And more importantly, what happens when too many people realize the system no longer has room for them?